All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a good weekend. So today we're going to be inside of a new Excel file. It's going to be this if logic and date function. So go ahead and download that from Canvas. So just kind of want to go over a couple things. I have /class. That's going to be from last semester where I basically uploaded what we did together in class. I'm just going to leave it from last semester. It's about the same. That way you can kind of have a record of, how each of the functions works, that sort of thing. So, like I said, I certainly encourage you to follow along, but ultimately you do whatever you want. We're going to be passing around a seating chart today. I don't necessarily like to do seating charts, but with everyone wearing masks, it's about the best way I've found to learn everyone's name. So if you're not in a seat that you like, feel free to move to an empty seat. We have two over here. I guess those are your options. So like I said, wherever you're sitting today, it's going to be where you're going to be sitting the rest of the semester. So a couple things I'll note about it. I have listed the back of the room. It's going to be back there. And then I have the front of the room listed, as well as the podium. So the podium's right there. So that's what we're going to be passing around. So I'll start off. If you wouldn't mind also writing 10:10 on there for me. That's the time the class starts. You're going to be right there. Thank you. All right. So, like I said, it's all going to be in the if logic and date function. So go ahead and pull that up. And before we begin really writing too much, I just want to kind of talk about what an if statement is. The basic level is going to be a conditional statement. What I mean by condition is really any condition that we set. In general, it's going to be something to the effect of, greater than, less than, maybe greater than, equal to, maybe less than, equal to, maybe just equals to. Okay? Maybe we're even going to get a little bit crazy and say not equals to. Okay? Those are the main 6 we're going to use. And we may do this with numbers. We may say, let's come over here and say 12 is greater than 4. Okay? We may have something that's going to happen if that's the case. So we may tell it to say true. Okay? We may tell it to say false if it's not. Just examples here. But in general, we may also choose to use words. So we could say if word Andrew equals word Miller. Okay, do those two words, are they the same word? So that's going to be false, right? That's really what this whole unit is about. Okay, I say unit, it's really a whole lesson, okay? The whole unit's about Excel, obviously. So, is everyone kind of with me on what we're talking about? We're talking about conditions. All right. So, I think let's come down here to about cell 30, or row 30, so A30. And let's just go ahead and put in some of those different operators. So we have our greater than symbol. We have our less than symbol. We have our equal to symbol. We have our greater than equals to, less than equals to. And lastly, we have does not equal. So does not equal is going to look like this. All right. And I think these are pretty self-explanatory. You've probably had some sort of an algebra class before where they covered what each of those meant. The one I will mention a little bit is does not equal. It means you have some condition that does not equal. So instead of saying does not equal, or instead of saying equals right here, if I said does not equal, now what is this? True, because these two words are not in fact the same, right? So that's the gist of it, okay? And in practice, what we're going to have is we're going to have different types of conditions that we're going to apply. And based upon those conditions, certain things will happen. All right, so let's come up here to if. Okay, if's probably the most basic conditional statement we can use. So how do we start off a function in Excel? Yeah, equals. So we type in equals, and then we type in the function name. Now what? Open a parenthesis. Tells us we need these 3 arguments. Logical test, value of true, value of false. Okay, so the logical test is going to be that criteria. Where we're saying if two things equal, if they don't equal, one's greater than the other, whatever we want to say. Okay, now you'll notice that these value of true and value of false are in brackets. Who remembers what that means? Yeah, they're optional. We don't have to include a value of true. Okay, in fact, what happens if we don't include them is it's just going to tell us if it's true or false. Okay, but we can also select whatever we want to have happen here. In fact, we could even use additional functions here if we wanted. Okay, so that's what we're talking about with the if. Okay, so we're going to do some logical tests. So let's just start off pretty basic. Someone throw me their favorite number. 12. Okay, so I heard 12 and 6. Let's say if 12 is greater than 6. Okay, we know that in fact 12 is greater than 6, right? Okay. So someone throw me your favorite word. Dog. Okay, someone else throw me their favorite word. Cellar door. Okay. So what this is going to do is this is going to look at this condition, and this is what's going to be returned if it's true. So we know this condition is in fact true, so it will turn back dog. It's going to return dog. If it were false, it would return cellar door. Okay? By the way, for non-numeric things, you have to put them inside of quotation marks. Does that make sense? All right, so of course it gives us back dog. If we were to change this condition around to be if 12 is less than 6, now what should it give us back? Okay, so there we go. So we can mess around with a condition however we like. And that's a basic if statement. But sometimes we want to do more than that. So maybe we want to add things that make a condition, that meet a condition. Maybe we want to average things that meet a condition. Or maybe we want to count things that make a condition. That's where these SUMIF, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIF statements come in. So let's begin with the most basic one, COUNTIF. What this is going to do is this is going to tell us how many things meet that condition. So we're going to use the months column for most of these. So we start off equals COUNTIF, open parentheses, just grab the entire months column. Just click up here in the E, hit a comma. Next you can see it's asking for the criteria. Now, even though I would make an argument that greater than and all that is numeric, Excel doesn't think so. So whenever you're using a greater than or any of those sort of things, you use them inside of quotation marks as well. Okay, so we're just going to use quotation marks. Someone throw me your favorite number between 1 and 12. Okay, I heard 4 first, so we'll use greater than 4. Okay, so we're counting these months that are greater than 4. So that should be 5 through 12, right? So what should that answer be? 8, right? And of course it is in fact 8. Now I also heard 7, so let's go back up here, and instead of being greater than 4, let's do less than 7. Okay, so we're just changing this up a little bit, nothing too complicated. And we go to 7, there are in fact 6 numbers up here smaller than 7. Does everyone understand that? That's your COUNTIF. Okay, SUMIF is going to allow you to add things based on a condition. Now, one thing that's important to note here is you're going to have a sum range. Sum range is what you're actually adding. It's going to be optional. You don't have to include it. But if you wanted to have a criteria that you're looking for in one column, and then have what you're actually adding up in another column, then you would certainly have a sum range. Does that make sense? So we're going to use our good friend SUMIF. Again, first, we're getting the range. That's where the condition will be tested. So we're going to test it in the E column. Someone throw me your favorite number 1 through 12. Okay, heard 4 first. Let's add if it's greater than 4. Okay, we could stop here because if we look, sum range is in brackets, which means it's optional. We could stop here. What that will do is that will add up from 5 all the way to 12. We can certainly do that, can we not? Okay, gives us 68. So in other words, what that did is that took the sum of these guys right here. All right, but that's not always the most useful thing. It may make more sense to add up another column based on that criteria. So we can set a sum range. Okay, let's use the sum range of the F column. So instead of adding up from 5 to 12, it's going to add up over here from 4 to 8. And that gives us 44. Okay, so that just took this sum right here. Because condition was anything greater than 4, it's going to add inside the F column. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, and then lastly, well, not quite lastly, I guess, but lastly for this little bit, we have average if. Okay, so just like SUMIF and COUNTIF, okay, we're going to start off function name, and we specify the range. I'm just going to use the E column again, and now we're giving it a criteria. So what should the criteria be to average? How about greater than 5? And I'm not going to put an average range right now. We're just going to average from 6 to 12. And that, of course, is 9. So we're taking an average of this. You can just look at that and tell that 9 is in the middle. So that, of course, is going to be the average. Now, of course, that only works with equal spacing, which we have. Okay, but if I wanted to, I could also average some different numbers. So I could use the F column if I wanted to. And that, of course, gives us a little bit different value there. Okay, so this is getting a little bit more cool, but it's still not too cool for school, is it? Okay? We're kind of not even quite what I'd consider cool, but we're getting there. So up to this point, everything has been one condition in one statement, right? You think that's where we're going to stop? No, I don't think so either. Okay, so we have average ifs, countifs, and we have SUMIFs. And these change up the order of stuff a little bit. You're going to start off with either the average range, the count range, or you're going to start off with the sum range. And then you're going to have criteria range 1, and then criteria 1, and so on and so forth. It's a little bit different order. Now, if that confuses you, you could choose to always use the ifs version of the functions. Okay, that's certainly something that is valid to do. You don't have to, but you can. All right, so I'll leave that up to you, however you want to do things. I'm pretty cool with whatever, within reason. Okay, so let's go ahead and see this. We just start off with average ifs. Okay, and you can see, like I said, we start off with the average range. So what we're actually going to average. Okay, and let's just use the F column again. Why not? Okay, and now for criteria range 1, we're just going to select the E column. And basically what we can do here is we can set multiple criteria. And each of the criteria must be met for that value in the F column to be included within the average. Is that clear? Okay, so for the first criteria, let's just pick greater than 5. Okay, and for the second criteria range, we're just going to use the E column again. And for the second criteria, which, by the way, you can see these are optional, so you can just, in fact, use a single criteria if you wanted. Let's do less than 2. Okay, what's the problem with this? So when I run this, what's going to happen? We get to divide by 0. Okay, why do we get to divide by 0? Is there anything that is both greater than 5 and less than 2? Okay, why not? Because if it's greater than 5, it's going to be 6 through 12. If it's less than 2, it's going to be 1. Okay, those don't have any intersections, do they? Okay, so it gives us a divide by 0 because what we're doing is we're having 0 in the denominator of the fraction. Okay, so think back to how an arithmetic average is calculated. Take the sum 1 to n. Okay, you're going to add up all the x's, divide by n. Okay, if n is 0, you're divided by 0, which is undefined, which gives you the divide by 0 error in Excel. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, like I said, it's not a math class. I don't expect you to give me a proof for why you can't divide by 0. I don't expect that. But that's why you have to have something included in the average. All right, so we're going to leave that like that. Countifs. So countifs allows you to count based on not just one criteria, but multiple. All right, so let's try that. Okay, so we're going to start off with the criteria range 1. I'm just going to use the E column. And let's try the exact same criteria. So greater than 5. Second criteria range is going to be just E column again. And we're going to do less than 2. Okay? So that's all we're going to do, the exact same criteria. And we're just going to see it's in fact 0 because nothing meets all those criteria. Okay, so they all have to be true to be run. Okay, and then lastly, SUMIF. It's going to allow us to add up multiple things based on multiple criteria. So we start it off, and then it's going to ask us for the sum range. So what are we wanting to add? Let's add up, let's do the G column. Why not? So we're going to add up the results in the G column. Criteria range 1 is going to be the E column. So instead of doing something that's going to give us 0, let's do something more exciting. So what we can do here is we can do between two things. So maybe I wanted to do between, let's say, bracket 4, comma 7. Okay, putting this in brackets. Who remembers what brackets means? Okay, so it means optional in Excel, but in the terms of mathematics, it means it includes it, right? So what we're saying is greater than 3, less than 8, right? Because we're including 4 and 7. Is everyone with me? Okay, so let's just do this. Okay, so if you got the E column, I said greater than 3, have the E column for criteria range 2, and I said less than 8. Okay, so now of course that gives me an actual answer. Okay, so it's 7. Not a very large answer, but what that did is that came over here, so greater than 3, so that's going to be this all the way up to less than 8. So we basically get 7 from adding up these values right here. Any questions? Sure. So again, we're starting off. We're just using the sum range. What we're actually adding is the G column. Okay, and then the criteria range 1. We're just using the months column, so that's the E column. Okay, first criteria, we're trying to get everything from 4 to 7 in the months. So we're using, in this case, greater than 3 for the first criteria range. And then the second criteria is going to be less than 8. So the criteria range 1 and 2 are the same because they're both the months column. They're not always going to be the same, by the way, but in basic examples like this, they will be. Any other questions? All right, you guys ready to see some stuff with somewhat more realistic numbers? So let's come over here to the bank data worksheet. Okay, and I've added a couple things to this. So a couple different ways you could insert. The first way would just be to grab everything below where you want to insert. Use Control Cut, so that's going to be Control X on your keyboard, and then you can just paste it below that. That's certainly one way you could insert. Another way would be to click on a cell and just use the Insert button. So a couple different ways. Okay, and there's different cases where you would use different ones. All right, so we're looking at the average of single people's balances. Okay? So we're just going to look at those. All right. So, basically, we have a column in here for marital status. In general, people are either married or single. Okay? Pretty a binary thing. Okay? You're not halfway married, I guess we'd call that engaged. But for this context, you are either married or you are not married. That makes sense? So accordingly, what we can do is we can do the average based on a condition. What does that sound like? What function? AVERAGEIF, that's exactly right. Okay, so we're going to do AVERAGEIF, and the range is going to be where the condition is found. So we're going to do that inside the C column. Okay, and I haven't talked about this too much yet, but what we're going to be using is quotation marks to use single. Okay, and then finally, our last part is going to be where we're actually averaging. So we come back to the problem. We want people's balances. So we find balance, and whoops, that's going to be this column right here, which is the F column. That's where the balance is found. Okay? So again, all we have to do is just put the criteria right here inside of quotations. So if quotation marks there, put single. Okay, so we get $1,460. All right, and I went ahead and added a line for average of married people's balances, just to see how much different they may be. You guys think it'd be higher or lower? Okay, we'll see. So someone walk me through what I do. Let's say I completely forgot everything about Excel. Tell me exactly what to type. Equals average if. Now, do I want to start with balance, though? Okay, first get the range. So what is that going to be? Column C. That's all right. And what's the criteria going to be? Okay, so do I just type in married, or do I put it in something? Parentheses or quotation mark? Okay. Not a big deal. Married. Okay, and then the average range is going to be the F column, right? So that's where we're actually averaging. And we can see they're pretty much the same, but a little bit higher for married people. Okay, that probably makes sense, because if you think about it, married people are probably what? Probably a little bit older, right? I mean, you would certainly expect them to be, at least. So, we could probably test that if we wanted. Do the average age of single versus married. You guys want to do that? I think that'll be pretty cool to see. Well, I mean, not that cool, but it'll be kind of cool. Average age of single, average age of married. Okay? So again, we're just going to use our good friend AVERAGEIF. And we're starting off with the range. So the range is still going to be the C column. We're going to use single as the condition. Make sure that's in quotation marks. And then finally, we're going to use the age column. Okay? It gives us 33.9. We just do the exact same thing for the average age of married. Okay, so average if, again, we get the C column, that's where the condition is. The actual condition is going to be married. And then finally, we're averaging the A column. Okay, so like I suspected, okay, you got a higher average age of married than single. Does that make sense? Because you would expect that a lot of people who are older are probably going to be married. Certainly not everyone, but certainly a lot. Okay, and you can see that number here. All right, next we're looking for count of failed loans. All right, so I think the best one to use here is going to be the previous outcome, because this loan variable right here is whether or not they were awarded a loan. Okay, so this is saying the previous loan, did it fail or not? This is saying were they awarded a loan currently. We don't know whether this loan has failed or not yet. So we're going to come over here to count failed loans. Which function do you think we may use here? Count what? If. Okay. Why don't we just want to use count? Exactly. So the condition being the loan failed. Otherwise, count will only count everything that we have. So we're going to use the range of the P column. And our criteria is going to be failure. Okay, and I'm not a big fan of talking about a failure on a Monday morning, yet here I am talking about failure on a Monday morning. Okay, tell me what's up with that. All right, so we have 490 failed loans. All right, does everyone see how I got that? Now that's pretty high, isn't it? Okay. So lastly, I have the average of 30 to 35-year-old balances. Which function do you think we may use for that? Average what? Average ifs is right. And why not average if? It's a range, so we have to have multiple criteria, right? If it were just one criteria, we could get away with average if. Okay. So we start off with what we're averaging in average ifs. So we're looking for the balances. So that's going to be this column right here. So it's going to be the F column. Our first criteria range is going to be the age column. So it's going to be the A column. And we're looking for between 30 and 35. So that's going to include 30 and 35. So our first is going to be greater than 29, okay, because we want to get 30 and up. Okay, and now for the second criteria range, it's still going to be the A column, right? Is it still the A column? Okay, and why? Exactly right, so that's where the ages are. So we're just going to do less than 36. Okay, I'll leave that up for a minute. All right, does everyone see how I got that? Okay, next we have one final thing. I think I added this one as well. Average of 50 to 65. So, someone walk me through this. Say I forgot everything. What do I do? What do I do before that? Equals average ifs, open parentheses. What's my average range? So I'm just going to do F colon F. Find that a little bit quicker. Now, what is my criteria range 1? Because that's where we're getting the ages from. Okay, so what's my first criteria going to be? Do I have to do anything special to that? Quotation marks. Greater than 49. Okay. Criteria range 2. A column, or as some of you may say, I really need to quit making jokes. So that's going to be less than 66, right? Okay. Go ahead and close that off. And you can see that it's larger. Is that unexpected? Would you expect a younger or an older person to have more money? You'd certainly hope the older person would, okay? Been around longer, had more opportunities to save and invest. Okay? So that's what we're talking about there. Any questions so far? Yeah. So because it's, for each of the new criteria ranges, you're always specifying because you can have different ones, basically. So you're having to specify it every time. So you're not limited to 2 criteria. You could have, I'm going to say at least 1,024. I'm not positive beyond that. But you can have at least 1,024 criteria ranges. You have to specify it each time. Any other questions? Sure. All right, any other questions? All right, let's go ahead and go over here to Amazon. So AMZN, let's go into this new worksheet down here. All right, and basically, this is a financial data set of Amazon's quarterly stock performance. So it's got a lot of different variables here. And the first thing I want to do is go ahead and grab out the year, the month, and the day. So if we come over here to the A column, you can see we have that information. Okay, we have the date. So I'm just going to use equals year, A2, because that's the row that we're in. So that gives us 2018. Do the same thing for month, month of A2. That gives us 6, so June. And then finally, we're not going to use it, we're going to get it anyways, the day of A2. And that gives us 30. Because we're just using basic date functions. All right, now what I'm going to do is to copy this down, just a reminder, click in this cell, go ahead and mouse over that square in the bottom right corner of the screen. I'm just going to drag that down. Okay, and the reason I manually dragged it is, see how there's nothing to the left of it? See how this is all blank? So normally, I'm kind of lazy and I like to double click and just have it auto-fill everything down. Problem with doing that in this case is there's nothing to the left of it. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll show you another way you could do it if you wanted to do it. Of course, once you have everything to the left, you can just come over here, double click. Come over here, double click. All right, and that goes ahead and fills everything out for you. So kind of nice and handy, right? So once you're to this point, we can go ahead and start doing some exciting stuff. Okay, so I'm going to grab the average of the December revenues. All right, which function am I going to use? AVERAGEIF, that is correct. And the range, that's going to be the month column we just made, right? Okay, so we're going to grab the AR row, the AR column, excuse me. And the criteria. Now in this case, we know it's a numeric value. We can just literally type it in. So December is which month? 12. So we just type in 12. And then finally, what we're actually averaging. Okay, we don't just want to average 12 over and over. That'd be kind of pointless, would it not? So we want to use the average range of the revenue column. Okay, so we come over here, we find revenue. If I were smart, I would have highlighted it, but I'm not that smart. It's going to be the N column. Okay, so we're just using that N column. We hit enter, and that gives us the value there. Now, let's take a quick little commercial break. For a company like Amazon, which quarter would you expect to have the highest revenue and why? Yeah. It's a quarter for, right? And why? Yeah, Christmas. You got Thanksgiving in there. Many others as well. A lot of holidays. A lot of people buying stuff. That's going to be true for most consumer. We talk about business to consumer. B2C, where a business sells something directly to a consumer. It's going to be true for most B2C markets. Is that going to be true for most, say, business to business markets, B2B? No, you'd probably see the end of the fiscal year. You'd probably see that quarter be the highest because people want to spend their budgets out, right? All right, that's just a brief little commercial break. Number of negative earnings per share. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're getting the number. What's another word for number in this context? Not necessarily value. Yeah. Count. And what specific type of count are we using? COUNTIF is exactly right. Okay. So we're going to come over here to earnings per share. We're going to use EPS basic. Okay, so we're just going to grab this as our range. And our criteria, we're seeing how many are negative. What's another word for negative? Or I guess another words for negative. Less than 0, right? So we're just going to have that be our criteria, less than 0. Again, make sure it's in quotation marks. Okay, it gives us 28. Now I added in number of positive earning per share. Okay, so you can choose to add that in if you'd like. It's going to be very similar. It's going to use COUNTIF. It's going to be the same range. So it's going to be the Q column for the range, and then the criteria is going to be greater than 0. That gets us 56. Now, another quick little commercial break. So earnings per share being negative, okay, that could be a bad sign, could be a good sign. Okay, Amazon would have you believe that it's a good sign. The reason they say that it's a good sign is because they're reinvesting into the company. Okay. For most other companies, if you see earnings per share that's negative, that's probably not a good sign, is it not? Now, some exceptions could be younger firms, not necessarily startup age, but younger firms, they may choose to continue to reinvest into the company. Nothing in this class is financial advice, but something to think about, okay? All right. So now we have number of PE ratios above 20. So in general, a PE ratio greater than 20 suggests what about the company's valuation? What does that suggest? Yes or no? So if we have a valuation, it can be fair valued, right? It can be undervalued. And what else can it be? Overvalued. So over 20 suggests overvaluation, according to a lot of traditional finance theory. Again, nothing in here is financial advice. Under about, depending on how conservative an investor you would be, between about 8 and 10, anything below that, it's going to be considered undervalued. But again, don't think of this as being, just this one measure is all you'd use. Okay, so number of PE ratios above 20. Which function are we going to use? COUNTIF, that is right. And our range is going to be those PE ratios. So we're just going to go to the AG column. And we're saying greater than 20. Okay, so 51. Okay. Any questions about this? Yeah. Sure. So we're just getting the PE ratios above 20. So we use COUNTIF for the range. We're using the AG column because that's where the PE ratios are. And the criteria is just going to be greater than 20. Does that mean that Amazon is overvalued? Not necessarily. It suggests it may be, but it doesn't mean it is. Okay. Yeah, it probably is. But it doesn't, not just because of this one measure. Okay? Any other questions? Last worksheet we're going to use today is the housing worksheet. Let's go ahead and go down here to the housing worksheet. Okay, so most common year of house in the data set. Which function does that sound like? Most common of something. It's going to be your good friend, the mode, right? So we look for the year built, which is going to be the U column. So we just do mode of the U column, U colon U. Okay, hit enter. That gives us 2005. Does that number make sense? Would we expect it to be more recent or less recent? Or does that make sense? Okay, why does it make sense? Exactly. So, unfortunately, as we know, after the housing crisis, many developers and builders went bankrupt. They didn't come back. Okay, so when they didn't come back, what happened to the supply of housing? Eventually it'll probably decrease, but for the most part it stayed pretty constant, right? Because there are still some developers, still some builders. We're not building at the same rapid rate though. So today, what does that mean for housing prices? Going up, because the supply is staying very stagnant. Okay? Think about a basic downward-facing demand curve. Okay, then you have your supply curve, right? You guys remember this from microecon? So if supply shifts this way, you know, we're pricing at the equilibrium. That's our assumption here. What happens to prices? They increase. Okay, so how can we get around that? What can we do? Is there anything we can do? If we want to increase the supply of something, there's a lot of things we could do. Okay? So you could make an argument. I'm not necessarily saying I agree or disagree with any of these arguments, but you can make an argument that regulations are burdensome for new houses. Things like having smoke detectors, things like having studs every 16 inches. You may say, forget smoke detectors, let's have studs every 24 inches. Okay, that makes a house less expensive, right? Which should, in turn, do what to the price? Should decrease it. Okay, that's certainly one thing you could do. And I'm not suggesting getting rid of smoke detectors, but I think you could probably make an argument that a lot of building regulations are unneeded. Okay, I'm not saying I'd agree with it. I'm just saying you could make that argument. So that's certainly one way. Another way, could you incentivize development? Okay, certainly. You know, you could certainly subsidize stuff. Now, then you get into the whole concept of a subsidy effect. Okay, it's not a microecon class, but a subsidy effect does what to prices over time? It's going to increase them, right? Okay, because there's a subsidy in effect, that means that people are able to afford more. Scarcity still exists. Ergo, whenever you increase a subsidy over time, the prices are going to reach that equilibrium. Not immediately, but eventually. What else could you do? Could you potentially lower the Fed rates? Is that possible? Pretty low already, but you could certainly lower them more. That might entice some development. Let's see. Could the government themselves choose to build housing? Is that a possibility? Yeah, they could. Again, I'm not saying any of these options are good or bad. I'm just saying these are possibilities to increase supply. Okay, I think you get the idea there. So that's what we're talking about. So that's why the year is 2005 for the most in the data set. There are certainly more recent homes. Okay, so for the median sale price, how are we going to calculate the median sale price in Excel? What are we going to do? Equals median of the sale price column, which is right there in CD. Gives us $160,000. Okay, you might be seeing $160,000 and thinking that sounds pretty good. Okay, so lastly, we're just going to cover a couple of these. The average 50 square footage. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to do a range, right? And specifically, the goal of this is to have it to where we copy it down, but we're not going to have time for that in class. You're also not going to be tested over it. But if you look at the class example, you can see basically what you do is you add in the year, and then you just do the previous plus 10, and you copy that down. Okay, and then you would just have the less than symbol and to sort of do concatenation, which again, we're not going to do in this class, but that's how you would do it. So to do it manually, we use AVERAGEIFS, right? So we're taking the AVERAGEIFS, the average range, we're looking for square footage. So we just find square footage somewhere in here. I think it's AV. Okay, next we're looking for the year. So the year built is the U column. So that's going to be our criteria range 1. And we're starting off with the criteria being for 50, so that's going to be greater than 1949, right? Greater than 1949. And for the criteria range 2, we're going to use the U column once again, so just use U colon U. And now the criteria 2 is just going to be less than 1960. Okay, does everyone understand that? So we're trying to get from 1950 to 1959, including 1950 and 1959. That's why we selected greater than 1949, less than 1960. So we hit enter, and that gives us this 1,288 square feet was the average. Okay, so we're just going to copy this entire formula right here, hit escape. Come down here to 2010. Just going to paste it back in here, and I'm just going to change the years. So to get 2010 to 2019, we're going to make this first year be 2009, and the last year should be 2020, correct? 2020. And as we can see, unsurprisingly, the average size of the home has increased. Okay, I don't think that's too surprising because we know that older homes tend to be smaller, right? So this makes sense. All right, so I'll leave this up. Like I say, I already have this posted in Canvas under the dash class. So if you want to take a look at that, you certainly may. Apart from that, that's all I have for today. I'm going to stick around for any questions, and then I'll head to office hour, which, just a reminder, is on this same floor in room 050. So I'll be in there until 12:20 if you have any questions. Apart from that, I hope you all have a great day. Hopefully I'll see you all Wednesday.